Day 20 of the apocalypse. I was sitting on the terrace of a guest house on the island in the middle of the lake. The tomahawk steak on the grill was sizzling. Tiny bubbles formed along the inside of the ice-cold beer glass. On the opposite shore was a living hell, with zombies everywhere and people barely hanging on. For me, though, it was just another lazy weekend after quitting my job with nothing to do. It all started in the pre-dawn hours that day, 4:50 a.m. I leaned against the terrace railing of the 3-story guest house. My phone screen was full of debt collection texts from online lenders. There were also non-stop messages from my family pushing me to take the civil service exam and go on blind dates. At 24, I'd already spent 2 years unemployed after quitting my e-commerce job. I had no savings and still owed tens of thousands in online loans. I didn't want to stay in my rental place getting bombarded with collection calls, and I definitely didn't want to go home and listen to my parents nag. It just so happened that my uncle had opened a trendy guest house on the island in the middle of Jinghu Lake. Before it opened, he needed someone to stay on the island, with room, board, and pay included. I pretty much packed my bags overnight. Then I took a boat to this isolated island surrounded by water. My uncle's requirements were simple. Take pictures of the island's sunrise and sunset every day. Check the guest house facilities and report in to the work group. The sky was starting to brighten. I pulled out the used flagship phone I just bought. I opened the camera to snap the sunrise over the lake and get it over with. The camera slowly swept across the shimmering lake. Then it settled on the trendy lakeside night market 800 meters away. It should have been the time when the vendors were packing up and cleaning. But on my screen, the lights on the street were jerking all over the place. The crowd was packed together like a bunch of headless flies. Across the wide lake, the screams seemed to drift over on the wind. I frantically zoomed in with 2 fingers. I pushed the 100 times zoom to the limit. The moment the AI image enhancement finished, the beer can in my hand hit the floor with a clang. It felt like all the blood in my body froze in an instant. I saw something that absolutely shouldn't have existed in real life. It wasn't a drunken brawl, let alone some night market dispute. They were vicious monsters straight out of an apocalypse novel, tearing into living people. And this citywide disaster was only just beginning. The zombie outbreak had started. The vendors and late-night diners in the food street were running for their lives. Chasing after them was a group of grotesque monsters lunging at people and biting them like crazy. During my 4 years in college, I'd read every apocalypse web novel out there. One look was all it took for me to realize this was exactly like the zombie virus outbreaks in those novels. My fingertips were trembling. I wanted to order some breakfast to calm myself down. But the lakeside shopping district that was usually open 24/7, with its hundreds of bubble tea shops, snack places, and convenience stores, all showed as closed within just a few minutes. Something's wrong. Really wrong. I immediately opened a local short video app. More than a dozen short videos with footage from the scene were right at the top of the search results. The newest one had been posted just a minute ago. In the video, the streets were full of people running in panic and zombies lunging in to bite them. Blood was splattered all over the shop windows facing the street. I leaned against the cold railing. Cold sweat instantly soaked through my hoodie. The situation was already completely out of control. Even the authorities didn't have time to react. The zombie virus had really broken out across the entire city. The people still asleep, about to wake up and go to work, had no idea the time they had left was already down to the minute. An ordinary person would probably be breaking down and crying by now, calling their family like crazy. But as I looked at the island beneath my feet, surrounded by water on all sides, a cold smile tugged at my lips. The far shore of the lake was about to turn into a living hell overrun by zombies. And this lonely island in the middle of the lake was about to become my impregnable kingdom in the apocalypse. For everyone else, this disaster was the end of the world. But for me, it was the only way to survive. On the far side of the lake was a living hell overrun by zombies, while at the center of the lake was my impregnable kingdom in the apocalypse. I turned and rushed into the inn, gripping the master control key my uncle had given me. I had to figure out every last advantage this island had. The whole island was surrounded by water, and even the shortest distance to shore was 800 meters. There was only one way onto the island, a 300-meter steel trestle bridge. Zombies had no reason and definitely couldn't swim. The wide mirror lake was the perfect natural barrier against a zombie horde. No matter how massive the horde on the far shore got, it was never setting foot on this island. The supply stockpile in the inn was even more unbelievable. Just yesterday afternoon, my uncle had a whole boatload of supplies brought over. It filled the inn's storage space to the brim. I opened the freezer in the basement. It was packed with all kinds of beef, lamb, seafood, and staples. The storage room was neatly stacked with vacuum-sealed rice, flour, and canned goods. There was enough to feed 500 people for 10 full months. Drinking water was even less of a problem. The inn had a complete lake water purification and filtration system that produced safe drinking water directly. The storage room also held over 1,000 cases of bottled mineral water and all kinds of drinks. The power supply and security were top-notch too. The roof was covered with solar panels, paired with high-capacity storage batteries. There were also 2 high-power generators freshly filled with diesel. At the entrance to the trestle bridge, there were blast-resistant gates and motorized lift barriers. All the doors and windows were made of bulletproof tempered glass. The security room was fully stocked with stab-proof vests, blast shields, and high-voltage stun guns. There were even several speedboats. And most importantly, right now, I was the only person on the entire island and in the entire inn. Everything on this island was mine. Without a second of hesitation, I turned and sprinted at full speed toward the control room on the inn's first floor. The zombie horde was about to sweep through the entire city. I grabbed a fire wrench. I smashed open the glass door to the control room. I slammed my finger down on the island's highest level lockdown button. My uncle had this red button installed for extreme typhoons, rising lake water, and terror attacks. Once it was pressed, the whole island would instantly go into full lockdown. Other than the main controls in the control room, there was no way to open it from the outside. Inside the control room, a whole wall of surveillance screens clearly showed the entire island, including the boardwalk entrance and the main lakeside road across the lake. As soon as the button was pressed, the island's entire defense system activated at once. At the boardwalk entrance, the heavy blast-proof gates slammed down, completely sealing off the only way in. Protective netting on both sides of the boardwalk rose automatically, cutting off any chance of climbing onto the island. All the anti-theft locks on every door and window of the guest house engaged at once, clicking firmly into place. At the same time, the reinforced typhoon shutters outside came down, tightly protecting every window. The island's infrared surveillance and motion detection systems all switched on at maximum sensitivity. In an instant, the whole island became an impregnable fortress surrounded by water on all sides. I didn't stop. I kept going and finished the final setup. I turned off all the landscape lights around the boardwalk and the guest house, leaving only the indoor lights on. I started the diesel generator. The backup unit was physically separated from the city power grid to prevent outages if the grid collapsed. I hauled both speedboats onto shore and locked them in the storage shed. That completely ruled out any chance of outsiders getting onto the island. I kept only the core systems running: surveillance, lighting, refrigeration, water supply, and essential electrical circuits. By the time I finished all that, the sun was just breaking through the morning mist over the lake. The city across the lake was slowly waking up. Rush hour traffic was backed up in long lines on the roads. Everything looked normal. But I knew this calm was nothing more than the final flicker of human civilization. Just then, the first shrill siren tore through the morning silence, faintly drifting over from across the lake. The zombie virus had broken out. Dozens of police cars and ambulances sped like crazy down the lakeside road toward downtown. Holding a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice, I stood in front of the only panoramic floor-to-ceiling window on the third floor of the guest house that wasn't covered by shutters, coldly watching everything across the lake fall apart. Mass chaos erupted in the rush-hour subway stations, and screaming crowds poured out of every exit with more than a dozen twisted figures chasing after them. Chain reaction rear-end crashes kept happening on the city's main roads. Drivers abandoned their cars and ran, bringing the whole road to a complete standstill. The once bustling shopping districts, office buildings, and schools all pulled down their rolling shutters. Crying, screaming, and blaring car horns all blended together. The entire city had completely turned into a living hell. My phone started blowing up with messages from every group chat I was in. But soon the signal cut out completely, and no calls could get through. Regular broadband went down too, and the city's entire communications system completely collapsed. The people who had headed out to work that morning, packed into subways and stuck on the roads, died thinking it was nothing more than a normal traffic accident and some sudden public safety incident. Zombies wandered the streets. Survivors struggled in despair. The countdown to survival started ticking above everyone's head. I turned and went back to the guest house's open dining area. I set the cooked tomahawk steak on the table. Then I opened a bottle of chilled sparkling wine. Looking through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the living hell across the lake, I slowly cut off a piece of tender beef. Everyone else's countdown to surviving the apocalypse was, to me, just the official start of my end-of-the-world vacation after quitting my job. Just as I was enjoying my first big breakfast of the apocalypse, the surveillance alarm in the control room suddenly started blaring. At the entrance to the dock, a speedboat packed with people was charging straight toward the island. The red alarm in the control room shattered the peace on the lake. On the monitor, the modified speedboat was already within 50 meters of the dock. Its hull was covered in welded metal plating. A homemade ram was mounted on the bow. All 10 people on board were armed with steel pipes and machetes. They were no ordinary refugees. I tightened my grip on the fire axe. My fingertips landed on the island's defense control panel. I wasn't the least bit rattled. When the speedboat was 30 meters from the gate, I pressed the button for the dock's high-pressure water cannons. 2 thick streams of water slammed straight into the bow. The speedboat capsized instantly. Everyone was thrown into the freezing lake. Those who couldn't swim sank straight to the bottom. The ones who could swim grabbed onto the hull and tried to make it to the dock. I immediately activated the dock's low-voltage electric grid, and blue arcs spread across the lake's surface. Everyone in the water convulsed and went still. The wreckage of the speedboat floated on the lake. I stared at the wreckage on the monitor, my heart tightening. An unfamiliar crow insignia was carved into the hull. This was no accident. I used the salvage system to clear the wreckage. From under the boat, I recovered a miniature tracker whose signal led straight to an abandoned office building on the lakeshore. These weren't random survivors. They were raiders who had come straight for me. My uncle's island was hiding secrets I had never known about. I crushed the tracker underfoot. Then I raised the island's alert level to the maximum. Infrared surveillance now covered 3 kilometers of lakeshore. At that moment, I understood that in the apocalypse, the enemy is never just zombies. The human heart hiding in the shadows is the most vicious beast of all. I went back to the dining room. The steak had gone cold, and I had no appetite for it anymore. This fortress that seemed so safe had long since been targeted by the wolves outside. I crouched behind the dock gate, rubbing the broken pieces of the tracker over and over. The metal was unusual, etched with intricate patterns, and clearly not something that could have been made after the apocalypse. I went through every document my uncle had left behind, and finally found an encrypted manual at the bottom of the safe in the security room. The cover bore the same crow insignia. The manual says this isolated island was built by my uncle together with a group called Black Crow. They provided the funding and military technology. My uncle was in charge of choosing the site and building it. The two of them fell out before the apocalypse broke out. My uncle forcibly took the island for himself. Black Crow has held a grudge ever since. A chill ran down my spine. So the thing that let me live here in peace had a deadly danger hidden inside it all along. If Black Crow can pinpoint the island this accurately, they must have some of its defense access. I immediately cut off the Trestle's remote connection to the central control room. I switched to fully manual control instead. I also added mechanical safeguards to every electronic lock, leaving no chance of them being hacked remotely. On the surveillance feed, a faint light came on in the office building by the lake, and several dark figures were setting up equipment on the roof. They were clearly scanning the island's defenses. I shut off all non-essential lights on the island, leaving only a dim light in the central control room, like a hunter lying in wait watching its prey. A horde of zombies wandered below the office building, but the dark figures didn't care at all. They clearly had a way to deal with the zombies. I tightened my grip on the high-voltage stun gun and sneered to myself. Black Crow thought they could take the island easily, but they had no idea I'd already turned it into a fortress. Whether they came to rescue or kill, if they dared set foot on my territory, there was only one ending for them: death. The cold morning fog rolled over the lake, and the Black Crow forces on the surveillance feed started to move. More than a dozen people pushed steel floating bridge panels to the lakeside, planning to build a temporary bridge across the lake. They wore stab-resistant gear and carried Molotov cocktails. Someone in the middle of the group was operating electronic equipment, clearly trying to break through the defenses. I watched the bridge come together and didn't make a move right away. I needed to figure out all their tricks first. The floating bridge stretched 100 meters out over the lake. The Black Crow members stepped onto the bridge in groups, steady on their feet and completely unafraid of the zombies. The vials at their waists gave off a sharp smell, probably some special formula that could drive zombies away. I pressed the activation button for the automatic grenade launcher on the shore. The first grenade hit the middle of the bridge dead on, blowing the steel plates apart and sending water spraying into the air. The bridge snapped in two instantly. The Black Crow members panicked, but they still refused to retreat. Instead, they pulled out a signal device and sent a message. I immediately activated the electromagnetic jammer and blocked all signals. At the same time, I lowered the trestle gate by 10 centimeters, exposing the sharp cutting blade. The remaining Black Crow members tried to retreat to shore, but a zombie horde suddenly rushed out behind them and tied them down. They swung their blades and fought back, but there were too many zombies, and they were swallowed up in an instant. I watched the chaos on the surveillance feed without the slightest bit of sympathy. In the end, Black Crow's greed turned them into zombie food, but I didn't let my guard down. The manual said Black Crow was a major force. These people were only the advance team. Their real main force was still waiting behind them. After clearing away the bridge wreckage, I began a full inspection of the island's systems. The moment I entered the central control room, the energy panel suddenly lit up red. The solar power system and storage batteries had lost 30% of their capacity for no reason. The lake water purification system started lagging. My heart sank, and I immediately removed the back panel of the control console. There was actually a tiny jammer wrapped around the wiring, clearly Black Crow's doing. This jammer could slowly eat away at the system. If I'd found it 3 days later, the island's power and water supply would have completely shut down. Following the emergency steps in the manual, I rewrote the system program, deleted all outside access, and made the defense system completely private. No one but me could control it. While fixing the system, I noticed pry marks on the ventilation duct in the underground storage room. After going in to check, I found several opened packs of compressed biscuits piled in the corner. They were covered in a colorless, odorless slime. I tested the slime with a reagent and found it was a slow-acting neurotoxin. Within 3 days of exposure, it would leave your whole body paralyzed, completely at someone else's mercy. Clearly, Black Crow had already sent people onto the island. They just hadn't dared make a move yet and wanted to poison me first. I burned and buried all the contaminated supplies, installed a high-voltage electric mesh over the ventilation duct, and set up infrared traps in key places like the storage room and bedroom. I sealed up every weak point on this isolated island, bit by bit. Against absolute defense, Black Crow's dirty tricks were nothing but a bad joke. I looked at the warehouse full of secure supplies, feeling sure that no matter how many schemes he came up with, I would stand firm. The bottomless deep blue suddenly blared a sharp alarm. A gigantic dark shape appeared on the screen. It was over 15 meters long, circling back and forth around the island in the middle of the lake. Its drawnsy against the island's foundation made even the lodge tremble slightly. I sharpened the image, and my heart suddenly clenched. It was a giant Mirror Lake catfish infected by the virus. Its flesh was rotting and its bones were exposed. A mutant aquatic beast unlike anything I'd ever seen. Ordinary aquatic zombies were nothing to fear, but this lake monster could smash the island's foundation. It was a deadly threat. I immediately activated the underwater defense system. The high-voltage grid went to full power, but the lake monster's hide was so thick that the current only stopped it for a moment. Instead, it only grew more violent, slamming madly into the protective wall along the shore. The concrete on the wall began to chip away. If it kept crashing into it, cracks would form in the island's foundation. I remembered what my uncle's manual said. The basement hid depth charges and underwater cannons. The depth charges and underwater cannons, with enough power, could badly wound a mutant beast in a single hit. I rushed to the underground armory, hoisted up a depth charge, and used the automatic deployment system to send it directly beneath the lake monster. When the countdown ended, an explosion rumbled up from the bottom of the lake. A huge spray of water shot into the air. The lake monster let out a shrill, agonized howl. A huge hole had been blasted through its body, but it still wasn't dead. It dragged its wounded body toward the center of the lake. I let out a sigh of relief. But I knew that lake monster wouldn't let this go. It and Black Crow had become two blades hanging over my head. I reinforced the protective wall along the shore. I set the underwater boiling system to stand by, ready for the lake monster to strike back at any moment. After the lake monster retreated, I thought I'd finally get a little peace. But the satellite communicator suddenly powered itself on. There was no incoming signal, only a cold, mechanical voice playing on a loop. It called out my name and my uncle's full name. It accurately listed every part of the island's defenses. At the end, the message said Black Crow's leader would personally lead a full-scale assault in 3 days with heavy weapons. Either hand over the island and the virus sample, or be torn to pieces. I clenched my fists. The words virus sample made my heart skip a beat. The manual had never mentioned any sample. Looks like my uncle was hiding an even bigger secret. I searched every corner of the inn and finally found it under the bed in the third-floor bedroom. An alloy safe embedded in concrete. It needed both a fingerprint and an iris scan to unlock. I used the fingerprint film my uncle left behind to unlock the safe. The moment it opened, a blast of cold air rushed out. Inside was a frozen test tube. It held a pale blue liquid, and the label read, "Original virus strain, core component of the cure." So this was Black Crow's real target. The island was just a cover. The original sample was the real treasure they were after. I hid the safe again. Then I moved the sample to the secret room in the central control room. The full-scale assault 3 days later wouldn't just be a battle for the island. It would also be a battle to protect the sample. I started checking the weapons. Automatic rifles, bullets, grenades, stun guns, everything was ready. I switched the defense system to maximum mode. Then I waited for Black Crow to walk right into the trap. The day before the final assault, I stood on the third-floor terrace, looking toward the lakeshore. Black Crow had more than 50 people with them. They were pushing crude armored vehicles forward. Homemade cannons were mounted on top. The lake monster was also coming in and out of view beneath the water, actually coordinating with Black Crow. Black Crow's leader clearly had a way to control mutated creatures. This battle was a two-front siege by humans and mutants. I wasn't afraid at all. If anything, it only fired me up more. From a broke young man who quit his job to the guardian of this island, I was no longer some weakling people could push around. I activated the island's invisible electromagnetic shield, disabling Black Crow's thermal imaging equipment. Then I raised all the automatic turrets along the shore. The grenade launchers were fully loaded. The underwater main cannon was aimed at the bottom of the lake. The wind carried the smell of blood across the lake. Black Crow's chemical drove the zombie horde to the lakeside, turning them into the first wave of cannon fodder. I stared at the monitors, watching Black Crow's forces slowly advance. I aimed the artillery at the pier and sneered to myself. They thought they could blast open the gate. What they didn't know was that the barrier wall had already been reinforced with bulletproof steel plates, and their artillery couldn't punch through it at all. After checking all the weapons, I sat down in the chair in the control room. I picked up a cup of warm water and quietly waited for the battle to begin. This island is my home and my uncle's life's work. It's also the place where the samples are protected. Whoever dares attack will be buried here. At dawn over Mirror Lake, The first ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds. Black Crow's artillery fired first, and the shells slammed into the barrier wall. They left only shallow dents. They didn't even pierce the steel plating. I pressed the turret activation button, and a hail of bullets poured out instantly. Black Crow's front line dropped on the spot. The armored vehicle's tires were blown out, leaving it completely disabled. Black Crow's leader roared and ordered a charge. More than 20 men rushed toward the floating bridge with shields raised. The lake monster also burst up from the bottom of the lake and slammed into the barrier wall. I activated the underwater cannon, sending up a column of water. It slammed straight into the lake monster's wound with tremendous force. The lake monster thrashed wildly in pain. It overturned Black Crow's floating bridge. The Black Crow members who fell into the water were pierced by the electric net. The lake turned into a deadly kill zone. The remaining Black Crow members hid behind cover and released specially made tracking zombies. These zombies had a keen sense of smell and could detect living beings through the barrier. They climbed up along the gaps in the barrier wall. I activated the infrared trap. High-temperature beams swept across. The climbing zombies were instantly reduced to ashes. Seeing the assault stall, Black Crow's leader personally led the team and fired a signal flare. 3 bomb-carrying drones appeared in the sky and flew toward the lodge. I immediately activated electromagnetic interference. The drones instantly lost control and exploded into pieces in midair. After an hour of fighting, Black Crow had lost more than half its forces, and the lake monster fled badly wounded. The leader retreated to the lakeshore with the survivors. He stared at the island with venom in his eyes. I looked at the devastation on the monitors and didn't pursue them. There's no need to chase a cornered enemy. I need to protect this island and wait for them to expose a bigger weakness. After Black Crow's remaining forces retreated to the office building, they didn't launch another attack. Instead, they built defenses by the lake. They were clearly cooking up a new scheme. I quietly sent out a drone to scout the area. I found them making a black chemical and coating their weapons with it. It could corrode metal. They were also digging a tunnel. They wanted to sneak onto the island from under the lake. A tunnel under the lake was the loophole I had overlooked. The lake bed of Mirror Lake is soft. It wouldn't be hard to dig through. Once they broke through, the inside of the island would be completely exposed. I immediately pulled up the sonar scanner and locked onto the tunnel's location. It was only 200 meters from the bottom of the island. I didn't block it off right away. Instead, I set underwater explosives above the tunnel entrance. Then I aimed the drainage outlet of the lake's purification system at the tunnel. Once the charges went off, the lake water would rush in and flood the tunnel. At the same time, I analyzed Black Crow's corrosive chemical. Using the chemical supplies my uncle left behind, I made a neutralizer. I coated all the defenses with it so they couldn't be corroded. After dealing with the threat under the lake, I checked the virus samples. The cryo chamber was working normally. The samples were completely intact. I broke down Black Crow's every move, one by one. Every step of their plan was under my control. I sat in the control room, watching the scan of the tunnel under the lake. A mocking smile curled on my lips. Digging a tunnel was just asking to die. The waters of Mirror Lake would become their grave. When the tunnel was within 100 meters of the island, the remaining Black Crow members sped up, clearly planning to dig through overnight. I waited until 3 in the morning, when everyone was exhausted, and pressed the detonation button. A muffled explosion came from beneath the lake. The explosives collapsed the front end of the tunnel, and lake water instantly rushed in. The Black Crow members inside had no time to escape and were all drowned. The next second, the screen showed the tunnel collapsing completely as the lake bed went still again. When the Black Crow leader learned the tunnel had been destroyed, he went completely mad. He drove all the zombies to the lakeside and strengthened them with the chemical, creating a zombie horde. He was going to force his way onto the island. The enhanced zombies were faster, stronger, and felt no pain. They swarmed toward the shore in dense waves. Their nails scraped against the protective wall, making a piercing sound. I activated the full-area high-temperature sterilization system. The surface of the protective wall instantly heated up to 100 degrees. The zombies rushing forward were instantly scorched, their flesh smoking as they all fell back. Seeing this, the Black Crow leader pulled out his final trump card. He injected himself with the mutation serum, and his body began to swell as his skin turned black. Bone spikes grew out of him. He turned into a half-man, half-beast mutant. Roaring, he charged toward the lakeside with strength far beyond that of ordinary zombies. He slammed his fist into the protective wall. More concrete broke off. I tightened my grip on the automatic rifle, my eyes cold. This was the Black Crow leader's last desperate move, and my best chance to finish him off for good. After mutating, the Black Crow leader became incredibly strong and actually bent the steel bars in the protective wall with his bare hands. The 20 men he had left followed behind him, trying to force their way onto the island. I directed the automated turrets to focus fire on him. The bullets hit him, but bounced off his tough skin. They only left faint blood marks. Roaring, he charged to the dock gate and slammed his fist into it. The iron gate dented slightly. I immediately activated the gate's physical lock and turned the dock's electric grid up to maximum voltage. Blue currents wrapped around his body. He convulsed all over but still refused to back down. He frantically slashed at the gate with his bone spikes. I knew normal attacks wouldn't work, and I thought of the armor-piercing rounds in the underground armory. I rushed over to load them right away. An armor-piercing round was chambered. I lay flat on the third-floor terrace and aimed at his chest. That was the only weak spot after the mutation. The shot rang out, and the armor-piercing round hit dead on. The Black Crow leader let out a piercing scream. He staggered backward. His men tried to rush forward and help him. I wiped them all out with grenades. Badly wounded, the Black Crow leader turned and tried to flee back to the lakeshore. I wasn't about to give him the chance. I took control of the main underwater cannon. One shot hit him in the leg. He dropped to his knees by the lake and couldn't move anymore. I stared at him on the monitor, unable to move. I felt not the slightest pity. After all the evil he's done, this is his punishment. I would be the one to end his life. I put on my stab-resistant suit and riot helmet. Then I slowly drove the modified assault boat toward the lakeshore. The Black Crow leader lay on the ground as his mutated body began to regress. His original face was revealed. His face was full of venom and resentment. I stood in front of him and didn't strike right away. I wanted to get the whole truth out of him. He let out a scornful laugh. He admitted that he and an overseas organization developed the virus together. It was meant to be a biological weapon, but it leaked by accident. After my uncle discovered his plot, he stole the original sample and hid on the island. He searched for 3 years before finally tracking this place down, all to take back the sample, destroy the evidence, and continue his evil plan. After hearing the whole truth, I was burning with rage. Countless people had died because of the virus. The city had been reduced to ruins. It was all caused by his greed. I raised the stun gun. At full power, I hit him in the heart. His whole body convulsed, and he completely passed out. I tied him to the assault boat, took him back to the island, and locked him in an underground chamber. I kept him alive so he could testify against the foreign organization. After erasing every trace of the Black Crow faction, all that was left on the lakeshore were zombies and ruins. The threat was gone for the time being. I returned to the control room, looked at the virus samples, and knew this was only the beginning. The foreign organization would never let this go. An even bigger global crisis was still waiting for me. After taking care of Black Crow's leader, I started consolidating the island's resources. I took over all the weapons, drugs, and equipment Black Crow left behind. The island's defenses were upgraded once again. Using Black Crow's repellent, I set up a quarantine barrier around the island. The zombies could no longer get close, completely ending the zombie horde threat. After recovering from its injuries, the lake monster never dared come near the island again and hid deep in the middle of the lake. It became a lingering threat in Mirror Lake. I went back through all of my uncle's secrets and found that he had already set up a global communications channel. It could connect me with official safe zones around the world. I tried sending out a signal. In just half a day, I got responses from several safe zones in North America, Europe, and Asia. They were all looking for the original virus sample, hoping to develop a cure and put an end to the apocalypse. I didn't hand over the samples right away and set my conditions instead. The island would keep its independence and accept no outside control. The safe zones had to provide technical support and supplies. Together, we would fight the foreign organization. All the safe zones agreed to my terms. I became a key figure in the apocalypse. I held the key to the cure and controlled an independent territory. I went from the owner of a lone island to the central hub of the global apocalypse. I stood on the terrace, looking out at the calm Mirror Lake. The once insignificant young man now stood at the top of the world. This transformation was a badge of honor the apocalypse had given me. The foreign organization moved faster than I expected. 3 days later, 4 military speedboats appeared on the lake. They were flying an unfamiliar black flag. It was the Shadow Serpent organization, the one behind the virus. They were well-equipped, carrying standard-issue rifles and anti-ship missiles. They had clearly come to seize the sample. I immediately contacted the global safe zones and requested air support. At the same time, I activated the island's ultimate anti-missile defense system. The laser turrets and the full-area power grid were all activated. The moment the Black Crow speedboats entered Mirror Lake, the laser turrets locked onto them. 2 speedboats were hit instantly, exploded, and sank. The remaining 2 launched missiles, which the defense system intercepted with precision. They exploded in midair. The Shadow Serpent operatives refused to give up and drove their speedboats forward in a headlong charge. The underwater main guns and the shore batteries opened fire at the same time. The speedboat was shot full of holes. Everyone on board died at the bottom of the lake. Using my drone to scout, I found that Shadow Serpent had a secret base on the outskirts of the city. It held virus research files and mutant experiment data. I put the virus samples and core data under double encryption and locked them in a secret room off the central control room. Then I took a modified assault boat straight to Shadow Serpent's secret base. Its bulletproof armor and hidden weapon systems stayed on standby the whole way. The base was hidden inside an abandoned subway hub. The perimeter was packed with zombies and mechanical guards. I used Black Crow's corpse driving agent to clear a path and slipped inside without making a sound. On both sides of the hallway, containment pods held all kinds of mutants. Data screens scrolled through the virus's evolution logs. Shadow Serpent was actually trying to fuse zombie and beast genes to create the ultimate weapon of war. I avoided the infrared alarms and slipped into the core data room. The moment I connected the drive and started copying, the base alarm suddenly went off. Shadow Serpent had activated the self-destruct sequence. In 10 minutes, the entire base would be reduced to rubble. Even worse, all the containment pods shattered. Enhanced berserker mutants broke free of their restraints. Their sense of smell and speed were far beyond ordinary zombies. They charged straight at my position. I slammed the alloy blast door shut and locked it tight with an electromagnetic seal. My fingers flew as I finished copying the data and hid the hard drive on my body. The blast door was already dented and warped by the mutant's claws. I grabbed the oxyacetylene torch from the corner and aimed at the lock, ready to break out. This infiltration mission had turned from an intel grab into a desperate fight for survival. Shadow Serpent's madness was far beyond what I expected. The oxy-fuel torch's heat melted through the alloy door lock. The instant I lunged out sideways, I quickly pulled back. A mutant's claws grazed past me and tore a slit in my stab-resistant suit. I hurled the virus suppressant I had prepared at the mutant. The drug slowed its movements. I seized the chance and sprinted down the fire escape corridor. The self-destruct countdown kept ticking down. The base walls began to collapse. Shadow Serpent's elite guards closed in from all directions. Standard-issue rifles opened up in a dense barrage. I ducked behind a support column and fired back with the assault rifle I had taken. But the magazine was already burning hot. Then the pursuers realized the end of the passage was sealed by a heavy blast gate. In desperation, I smashed open a fire pipe. A torrent of high-pressure water burst out. It shorted out the nearby electronic equipment, and the gate briefly failed. The moment it opened and I rushed out of the base, a violent explosion erupted behind me. Flames shot into the sky, swallowing the entire subway hub. The shockwave sent me rolling to the ground. I finally breathed a sigh of relief after confirming the data drive was undamaged. Then a warning suddenly came from deep beneath the lake. The lake monster under Shadow Serpent's control was swimming straight toward me. The escape wasn't over yet. The mutated beast and Shadow Serpent's remaining forces became two deadly obstacles between me and the island. I spun the assault boat around and floored it. The monster's massive body kept chasing me underwater. Its dorsal fin cut through the lake's surface, kicking up huge waves. I pushed the assault boat's engine to its limit. Even so, the lake monster kept getting closer. It suddenly leaped out of the water. Its huge jaws snapped at the stern. I immediately activated the boat's depth charge. The charge exploded beneath the monster. The huge blast threw it off balance for a moment. I took the chance to widen the gap. After returning to the island, I immediately activated the island's full defenses. I aimed the underwater main guns and shore turrets at the lake. The lake monster didn't dare come any closer. It circled the middle of the lake, roaring. I returned to the control room to analyze the copied data. I discovered that Shadow Serpent's leader was actually my uncle's former partner. The two of them had worked on the virus together. After my uncle discovered the conspiracy, he defected and stole the original sample. Meanwhile, the leader took control of Shadow Serpent and kept developing bioweapons. Even more shocking was this. Black Crow wasn't actually one of Shadow Serpent's subordinates. The leader had threatened her with her family's lives, forcing her to hunt down my uncle. That revelation made me see the imprisoned Black Crow in a new light. I went to the underground chamber. Black Crow was curled up in the corner. The side effects of the mutation drug were flaring up, leaving her writhing and trembling in pain. Behind the hatred in her eyes was a faint, almost unnoticeable hint of despair. I injected Black Crow with a relief serum. From her micro-expressions and body language, I confirmed the truth of the data. She was only Shadow Serpent's pawn. The real mastermind was its leader. Black Crow traced a coded message on the ground with her fingertip. She told me Shadow Serpent's remaining forces had already infiltrated the area around Mirror Lake. They were preparing to work together from inside and out, break into the island, and seize the sample. I immediately raised the alert level across the island. I installed triple-layer sensor traps at the pier, storage room, and ventilation ducts. I put the assault boat and all underwater weapons on standby. Late that night, surveillance caught 3 dark figures approaching underwater from the bottom of the lake. They were Shadow Serpent's elite infiltrators. They were carrying underwater cutting tools, trying to break through the island's defenses. I activated the underwater power grid. Blue electric currents swept across the lake's surface. The infiltrators were struck down instantly. The bodies floated to the surface. I followed the trail and looked into it. I found Shadow Serpent's temporary command post hidden in an abandoned lighthouse on the lakeshore. It had satellite communications equipment and was in contact with Shadow Serpent's overseas headquarters. I didn't make a move right away. Instead, I intercepted their communications signal. That's when I learned Shadow Serpent headquarters would send armed helicopters and amphibious troops. They would launch a full-scale assault on the isolated island in 3 days. A final battle that would decide the fate of the apocalypse was about to begin at Mirror Lake. I pulled together every fighting force on the island and brought Black Crow in as temporary support. She knew Shadow Serpent's tactics and could be the key to helping us reinforce the defenses overnight. We planted remote-controlled explosives at the pier entrance. We turned the top floor of the inn into a sniper post. The underwater main gun was loaded with special armor-piercing rounds made specifically for the lake monster and amphibious vehicles. Black Crow revealed that Shadow Serpent's leader had injected himself with the perfect mutation serum. He didn't have a zombie's mindless ferocity, but he kept his human intelligence with his strength, speed, and defense all maxed out. He was the most dangerous existence in the apocalypse. I moved the original virus sample to the deepest part of the secret chamber. I also set up the self-destruct program. If the isolated island fell, the sample would be completely destroyed and never end up in Shadow Serpent's hands. Early the next morning, the roar of helicopters came from above the lake. 3 armed helicopters loaded with missiles flew toward the isolated island. At the same time, 4 amphibious landing craft appeared beneath the lake. The lake monster took the lead as the vanguard and charged toward the shore. I stood at the top floor sniper post, gripping my modified sniper rifle. Black Crow took control of the automated turrets, and the island's defense system activated instantly. This battle of one island against an army had officially begun. The armed helicopters launched their missiles first. I activated the anti-missile system. 2 interceptor rockets shot into the air and accurately blew up the incoming missiles. The shore turrets opened fire at the same time. A hail of bullets raked the helicopter's fuselages. One helicopter's fuel tank was hit, and it exploded into a fireball and crashed from the sky. The remaining helicopters climbed higher, getting ready for a low-altitude assault. Black Crow used the electromagnetic jammer to instantly cripple the helicopter's navigation systems. The 2 aircraft lost control and slammed into the lake. The amphibious landing craft burst up from beneath the lake's surface. The soldiers charged the shore with guns in hand. I pressed the remote detonator. Flames shot into the sky at the pier entrance. The landing craft were blown to pieces. The lake monster took the chance to rush onto the shore. Its huge tail swept across the protective wall. Huge chunks of concrete broke off. I aimed at his old wound. The underwater main cannon fired with a thunderous blast. The armor-piercing round tore straight through his body. The lake monster let out one final roar. Its massive body sank to the bottom of the lake. It was completely lifeless. What was left of Shadow Snake took heavy losses, but they still fought to the death. The Shadow Snake leader personally led the charge, wearing bulletproof armor. She charged toward the lodge with a heavy machine gun in hand. Her mutated body shrugged off ordinary bullets. She tore straight through the wall of gunfire. She was only 10 meters from the pier gate. I switched to armor-piercing rounds and aimed at the Shadow Snake leader's head. The round hit her forehead, but bounced off her hardened skin. It left only a streak of blood. She charged to the gate and tore at the blast-resistant steel with her bare hands. She ripped a huge hole in the gate. Black Crow attacked from the side, hitting the leader with a high-voltage stun gun. The current froze her up for a moment. I took the chance to throw a pulse bomb. The powerful electromagnetic pulse destroyed the mutated gene activity inside her body. The leader let out a pained howl as her body began to regress and her strength dropped sharply. I rushed forward and pinned her down with hand-to-hand combat. I injected a special inhibitor into her neck. Her movement stopped completely. A brief clarity returned to her eyes, and with a roar, she set off the remote bomb strapped to her body. She wanted to take me down with her. I shoved Black Crow away and rolled clear of the blast wave. The explosion brought down the pier gate. The leader was buried under the rubble, completely lifeless. While clearing the battlefield, I discovered that the encrypted USB drive on the leader contained Shadow Snake's global coordinates and the virus's ultimate evolution plan. If the plan is carried out, an even more terrifying mutation disaster will erupt across the globe. I had to completely destroy every Shadow Snake stronghold. I shared Shadow Snake's coordinates with safe zones around the world and launched a joint cleanup operation. The major safe zones deployed fighter jets and special forces to wipe out Shadow Snake strongholds worldwide. The remaining Shadow Snake forces around Mirror Lake were wiped out in one sweep. Black Crow redeemed herself by leading a team to wipe out the remaining forces. She was granted amnesty by the safe zone. I returned to the isolated island. I began analyzing the virus's ultimate plan. I discovered that Shadow Snake had long since scattered virus seeds across major bodies of water around the world. Mirror Lake was one of the core nodes. A virus activation device was hidden at the bottom of the lake. I piloted the submersible to the bottom of the lake and found a metal control console 100 meters underwater. It was covered with countdown numbers. In 7 days, the virus would activate worldwide all at once. Using the termination code my uncle left behind, I cracked the program and dismantled the activation device. But it triggered a defense system. A huge cloud of vapor burst up from the lake bed, and mutated zombies surrounded me from all sides. The submersible was critically low on power. The weapons system had only one grenade left. At that life-or-death moment, Hey-Ya arrived in a rescue submersible. The 2 underwater machine guns swept through the mutants and tore open a path for me to break through. That underwater crisis nearly left me at the bottom of Mirror Lake for good. After returning to the island, I combined the original sample with Shadow Snake's data and developed an antiviral cure in the inn's lab. After hundreds of experiments, the first fully developed cure was finally successful. It could completely remove the virus from the body and restore the mutants to normal. I released the cure around Mirror Lake. The zombies gradually changed back. The berserkers regained human consciousness. Survivors across the city came out of their shelters and started rebuilding their homes. Safe zones around the world began mass-producing the cure and airdropping it into every overrun area. Things finally started to turn around in the apocalypse. Just as things were getting better, surveillance picked up an unknown signal source on the lakeshore. A new type of mutated zombie flew out of the city ruins. They had wings and could fly across the lake to attack the island directly. These zombies were incredibly fast and slipped past the ground defenses. They came straight for the top floor of the inn. I immediately activated the full-area anti-air laser system. The high-energy laser emitters hidden on the inn's roof and at the island's four corners started operating in sync. Blue beams wove an airtight web of fire at DG speed. The mutated zombies charging toward the inn's top floor were caught in the high-temperature beams and turned into charred ash one after another. Even so, 7 or 8 of them broke through the line of fire with their extreme speed. Their claws raked hard against the bulletproof glass. The harsh scraping noise pierced through the protective panels and echoed non-stop through the inn. These mutated zombies had gray-black rotten flesh covering their wings. Their bones jutted out like blades. A crimson glow flickered in their eye sockets. They kicked up a foul wind as they flew. They were definitely not the result of natural mutation. I quickly pulled up the island's surveillance and infrared thermal imaging for a deeper data analysis. I found that each of them had a miniature biosignal receiver implanted in its body. Their every move was being precisely controlled by a hidden signal from far away. They were airborne killing weapons carefully bred by what was left of Shadow Snake. I traced the signal frequency back to its source and pinpointed the unfinished skyscraper on the lakeshore. The top floor equipment room was the source of the signal. The remnants of Shadow Snake were trying to use airborne mutants to get around the island's ground and underwater defenses and seize the original virus sample I had hidden in the secret room inside the central control room. I loaded highly concentrated antiviral cure into the drop bays of modified military drones. Then I sent a squad of 10 drones fitted with armor and jammers straight toward the unfinished tower. At the same time, I activated the island's high-powered EMP device. It instantly blocked all biological signals within a 3-kilometer radius. The mutated zombies, cut off from command, immediately fell into chaos. After crashing wildly through the air, they all fell toward the lake. They were all torn apart by the high-voltage grid underwater. I stared at the monitor, my fingertip hovering over the drone detonation button, waiting for the squad to reach the target point. I was determined to wipe out the source of this airborne threat for good and leave the Shadow Serpent remnants no chance to strike back. The modified drone squad broke through the zombie blockade around the unfinished building. It hovered precisely outside the signal room window. Then it dropped the entire load of highly concentrated antidote inside. The thick antidote mist spread incredibly fast. The Shadow Serpent technicians hiding inside and controlling the signal were exposed to the mist, and the dormant virus in their bodies was completely cleared out. Once their human consciousness returned, they all collapsed to the floor from exhaustion. Their faces were full of fear and regret. I sent the drone crashing through the door. After making a complete copy of all the mutated zombie experiment data, I precisely blew up the core parts of the signal transmitter. The signal device on top of the unfinished building was instantly blown to pieces. The last batch of controlled mutated zombies in the world completely lost their commands. After circling in the air for a moment, they all crashed and died. I returned to the central control room and thoroughly analyzed the copied data. What I found was a shocking twist that could change everything. The Shadow Serpent organization had not been completely wiped out. Its second-in-command had secretly fled with the ultimate mutant gene blueprint. She was hiding in a military bomb shelter 100 meters beneath the city. By combining all the superior genes of the lake monster mutant zombie and the tracker zombies, she planned to create an invincible ultimate bioweapon for water, land, and air. And the virus activation device at the bottom of Mirror Lake was only the first step in her plan to destroy humanity. I immediately synced all the data to the Global Safe Zone Command Center. At the same time, I upgraded the island's full-spectrum defense system overnight. I linked the underwater, ground, and air defense systems with millisecond-level coordination. This island is not only where the virus samples are protected, it also has to become the stronghold that stops the ultimate mutant, the last steel line of defense guarding humanity's survival. A final showdown tied to the fate of all humanity had already begun in silence. I drove a modified assault boat fitted with reinforced bulletproof armor, a heavy machine gun, and antidote sprayers, and headed straight for the city's underground military bomb shelter with Black Crow. The antidote sprayers mounted on both sides of the modified assault boat kept spraying the whole way. The zombies wandering along the way, after coming into contact with the pale green mist, quickly lost their violent alertness. The virus inside them was cleared out, and they gradually regained human awareness and curled up on the ground. The entrance to the bomb shelter was tightly sealed by a half-meter-thick blast-proof alloy door. Shadow Serpent's number 2 had blocked the passage with dozens of enhanced mutants. The shelter's core area also held more than 100 unactivated super mutant embryos. Once they were successfully hatched, humanity would completely lose the ability to resist, and once again fall into the abyss of the apocalypse. Using the fingerprints and iris data I got from Shadow Serpent's leader, I cracked the blast door code and slipped into the cave without making a sound. But inside, I found biosensing bombs all over the cave. The moment they detected the vital signs of any non-mutant life form, they would instantly release an enhanced virus, reinfecting the survivors across the city who had only just restored order. Black Crow immediately grabbed the bomb disposal gear and headed for the passageway to disarm the bombs. I went alone into the core incubation chamber. The moment I stepped inside, I saw Shadow Serpent number 2 injecting a tube of pale purple ultimate mutant genes into her neck. Her body began mutating wildly at a speed visible to the naked eye. A pair of thin, membranous zombie wings sprouted from her back. Their surfaces were covered in hard scales like some kind of lake monster. Her hands turned into the razor-sharp claws of a tyrant mutant. She had become the ultimate bioweapon, combining the strengths of every mutant in one body. The instant she turned and saw me, her claws came straight for my face with a force that tore through the air. I yanked the high-voltage shock knife from my waist in one swift motion. My gaze was cold as steel. In this fight to the death against the ultimate bioweapon, I had to win. Losing was not an option. The ultimate bioweapon attacked as fast as lightning. Her claws grazed my neck and easily tore through the stab-resistant vest I was wearing. 3 bone-deep wounds immediately began to bleed. I used the momentum to roll to the side and barely avoided that fatal strike. Then I slammed the custom gene inhibitor I had prepared in advance straight into her mutated wound. The inhibitor instantly seeped into her body. It temporarily suppressed both her mutation rate and her violent temperament. I took the chance to activate the ultra-low temperature freezing system in the incubation chamber. Blast of -150-degree cold instantly engulfed the entire room, but it could only freeze her outer skin and couldn't damage her core. After disarming all the bio-bombs as fast as possible, Black Crow rushed over to back me up. The two of us stood back to back and formed a defensive formation. Together, we forced the bioweapon into the specially made gene lysis chamber. I started the lysis program at maximum power without hesitation. The mutant genes inside her began breaking down at an extremely fast rate. Her agonized screams shook dust from the walls of the incubation chamber. In her despair, Shadow Serpent number 2 detonated the backup virus canister hidden inside her body. I immediately sealed the lysis chamber door. Then I activated the full chamber virus purification protocol. Every trace of the remaining virus in the cave was completely eradicated. The hundreds of super mutant embryos also dissolved into harmless nutrient solution. While clearing the scene, I found an encrypted military communicator in the bioweapon's remains. It contained a large number of secret communications between Shadow Serpent and the top brass of the safe zones. So this was how Shadow Serpent had stayed hidden for years and escaped every manhunt. It was all because a mole in the United Council of the Safe Zones had been feeding them information. This mole held immense power and could overturn humanity's rebuilt order at any moment. I clenched the communicator tight. In my mind, a complete plan had already taken shape to root out the mole and wipe them out for good. I returned to the island with all the hard evidence stored in the communicator. Overnight, I carefully set a trap to lure the snake out. I deliberately sent a fake top-secret message to safe zones around the world, claiming the original virus sample had been moved to border safe zone number 3 for final destruction. Just as I expected, the mole hiding in the council immediately mobilized his private forces and the remaining Shadow Serpent operatives and rushed to the border overnight to intercept and kill. At the same time, he sent 8 top assassins to sneak onto the island, hoping to destroy all the evidence and get rid of me for good. Under cover of night, the 8 top assassins dove in through the lake and infiltrated the island. They wore stealth suits and carried armor-piercing tools and silenced weapons. They planned to quietly slip into the lodge and destroy the evidence. I had already set every trap on the island to the highest alert. The ventilation ducts, outer walls, climbing points, and secret room entrance were all covered by a triple infrared sensor grid. The moment they touched the sensor metal plates on the lodge's lower level, the high-voltage grid across the entire area activated instantly. Bright blue currents wrapped around their bodies. The first 3 assassins went rigid and fell into the lake on the spot. The remaining 5 scattered and tried to break through. 2 headed for the control room, and 3 rushed straight for the secret room. But they stepped on the anti-personnel trigger grenades I had planted, and the blast ripped up the hallway tiles. The shattered stone and shockwaves snapped their bones on the spot. I stood in front of the surveillance screens and watched coldly. I pressed the button to activate the internal high-temperature system. A scorching toxic heat wave swept through every corner of the lodge. In the extreme heat, the remaining assassin's flesh was charred. They were completely neutralized. I disposed of the bodies one by one. From a hidden inner pocket on the leader, I found a metal token engraved with the United Council emblem. The back was engraved with the Vice Speaker's personal code. The mole's identity finally came to light. I made encrypted backups of the token and the full surveillance footage of the infiltration. Then I locked down the island's entire defense system. At that moment, I was certain the mole would never just sit and wait. He would definitely come to this island himself and walk straight to his death. I picked up my wine glass and stood on the terrace. The lake was calm and still, but the reckoning with the mole was only just beginning. Clutching the mole's personal token, I had already mapped out the full plan to lure him out. I deliberately sent false information through an encrypted channel to safe zones around the world. I falsely claimed that the original virus sample and the evidence against the mole had been moved to a temporary border outpost. At the same time, I deliberately left gaps in the island's defenses, so the mole would think I had already left the island and the defenses were weak. I concentrated all firepower at the pier and the control room. The underwater main guns and laser turrets were all hidden and standing by. All that was left was to wait for the mole to personally lead his team here. Only 3 hours after the message was sent, an encrypted signal lit up from the abandoned lighthouse on the lakeshore. It was the Vice Speaker's personal communication frequency. He had fallen for it, thinking he could take advantage of the opening, seize the evidence, and wipe me out for good. On the surveillance feed, nearly 100 elite armed men had gathered along the lakeshore. They were equipped with armored vehicles, heavy machine guns, and breaching gear. Sitting in the middle of the black SUV at the front of the convoy was the Vice Chairman of the United Council. His face was full of cold, vicious confidence. I turned off the monitor and moved the virus samples and key evidence to the deepest underground chamber. Then I set up a double self-destruct sequence. If anyone tried to force it open, the evidence and samples would instantly be burned to ashes. After checking all my weapons, I loaded my automatic rifle with armor-piercing rounds. A grenade launcher hung at my side. This isolated island was the ultimate prison prepared for the traitor. His greed and betrayal would finally be paid for here and now. Before the morning fog had fully cleared, the traitor led his armed men and pushed armored vehicles toward the pier. The heavy machine guns opened fire wildly at the blast doors. The bullets hit the bulletproof steel plates and did nothing but throw off sparks. I stood in the control room, watching their futile attack. A mocking smile curled on my lips. When they had all gathered at the entrance to the pier and tried to blow open the gate with explosives, I pressed the remote detonator and the high explosives buried in the pier went off instantly. Flames shot into the sky. The armored vehicles were blown into scrap metal. The armed men in the front ranks were all swallowed by the flames. The remaining enemies fled in blind panic. I activated the automatic turrets along the shore, and a barrage of bullets formed a deadly net, cutting down the fleeing men one by one. The traitor cowered behind cover, trembling. He had never imagined the island's defenses would be this impenetrable. He had even less expected to fall into my trap. I slowly piloted an assault boat toward the pier, wearing blast-resistant armor from head to toe. With a high-voltage stun gun in my hand, I walked step by step toward the traitor huddled in the corner. He tried to pull a gun and fight back, but I broke his wrist with a single kick. The stun gun, set to full power, blasted through his chest. His whole body convulsed as he collapsed to the ground. He completely lost the ability to resist. I tied him up tight, took him back to the island, and locked him in the underground chamber. Black Crow had once been imprisoned here. Now it had become a cage for the traitor who betrayed humanity. What goes around comes around. I locked the traitor in the underground chamber. At first, he gritted his teeth and refused to confess. He tried to use his position in the council to pressure me and deny everything. I had no need for any extra interrogation methods. I directly projected the surveillance footage of the assassins sneaking in, the exclusive token, and all the communication records of the council traitor right in front of him. The evidence was ironclad. His face instantly turned pale as paper. Then I laid out the full truth about the virus research, the Shadow Serpent organization's evil plan, and the root cause of the world's collapse right in front of him, one by one. His mental defenses completely collapsed. Trembling all over, he confessed to every crime. Turns out he had already been bought off by the Shadow Serpent organization and taken huge bribes. He fed Shadow Serpent intel on the safe zones. He covered up their bioweapon experiments. He even secretly sabotaged the antidote research. He was trying to seize global power after the apocalypse. He gave up the network of moles spread across the world. It involved top officials from dozens of safe zones, all of them puppets of Shadow Serpent. Together, they worked to stop humanity from rebuilding. I encrypted the full audio and video of his confession and synced it to command centers in safe zones around the world. At the same time, I activated the island's highest level of authority and froze all the mole's power and resources. The mole slumped to the floor. His eyes were blank. He finally realized that all his careful scheming was nothing but a ridiculous farce in the face of absolute evidence and overwhelming power, and his fate had already been sealed. After safe zones around the world received the evidence and confession I sent over, they immediately launched a massive crackdown. Overnight, dozens of high-ranking moles were taken down. Shadow Serpent's spies within the human side were completely wiped out. When the imprisoned mole learned his accomplices had been caught, he completely went insane. While the guards weren't paying attention, he secretly activated a tiny remote device hidden in his collar. It triggered Shadow Serpent's backup bioactivation program at the bottom of Mirror Lake. The control room alarm instantly blared. On the lakebed's sonar screen, a dense swarm of red dots appeared. The remains of the mutant embryos that had supposedly been destroyed were somehow reactivated. Countless small aquatic mutants burst out of the silt at the bottom of the lake and rushed wildly toward the island. These mutants were small, incredibly fast, and had teeth as sharp as knives. They could chew through concrete and metal. This was Shadow Serpent's final desperate killing move. I immediately activated the ultimate underwater defense and fully powered up the high-voltage grid. The main underwater guns were loaded with buckshot. The shore turrets swung around and aimed at the lake. In an instant, huge white splashes spread across the lake. The mutants were torn apart by the electric current and artillery fire. But there were endless numbers of them, charging at the island wave after wave. I stared at the surveillance screen, my heart sinking. These mutants were only the vanguard. There had to be a mother body deep at the bottom of the lake controlling them. Only by destroying the mother body could this underwater crisis be ended for good. The aquatic mutants' attack grew even fiercer. Tiny gaps were being chewed into the high-voltage grid. The concrete at the island's foundation was starting to show signs of chipping. I operated the automated underwater recovery system. It kept clearing mutant corpses out onto the lake surface. But new mutants were appearing much faster than they could be cleared away. On the sonar screen, the red dots were getting denser and denser. They were already closing in on the shoreline barrier wall. I knew conventional firepower couldn't wipe them out completely. I immediately pulled up the lakebed geological map my uncle had left behind. I found that all the mutants were pouring out of the deepest abyss of Mirror Lake. That was exactly where the mother body was hiding. I handed the island's entire defense system over to Black Crow. I put on deep-sea diving gear, took a gene-splitting bomb and an underwater rifle, and piloted a one-man submersible toward the abyss at the bottom of the lake. The water was pitch black. Everywhere the searchlight swept, I saw the savage shapes of mutants. They threw themselves at the submersible, their claws scraping against the bulletproof glass. I pulled the trigger on the underwater rifle, and the bullets tore through the mutants' bodies, blasting up huge clouds of murky lake water. The submersible slowly descended into the 100-meter-deep abyss. What I saw made my pupils shrink. A massive mutant host was crouched on the lakebed. Its body looked like a giant jellyfish, with countless embryos wrapped around its tentacles. It kept releasing new mutants. It was the source of this whole crisis, and the last bioweapon threat Shadow Serpent had left behind for humanity. The mutant host in the lakebed abyss sensed my presence. Countless tentacles dripping with toxic slime lashed wildly at the submersible. The spikes on the tentacles easily sliced through the submersible's outer armor. I immediately maneuvered the submersible to dodge the attacks. At the same time, I fired underwater decoys. The murky lake water temporarily blocked the host's vision. I knew ordinary attacks couldn't damage the host's core. I had to place the gene-splitting bomb precisely inside its body. I piloted the submersible around behind the host. I aimed at the glowing core organ in its abdomen and firmly attached the bomb to it. Sensing the danger, the host let out a silent hiss. Its tentacles frantically wrapped around the submersible. The toxic slime began corroding the cockpit glass. Without hesitation, I started the bomb's countdown. Then I drove the submersible straight up at full speed to break free. A violent explosion erupted behind me, and the shockwave from the lakebed hurled the submersible several meters away. I looked back. The host's body had been blown apart. Its glowing core went completely dark, and all the tangled embryos turned into black water. The mutants on the lakebed instantly lost control and stopped attacking. One by one, they sank into the silt and died. I piloted the submersible back to the island. The moment I stepped ashore, the alarm in the control room stopped blaring. All the red dots on the screen disappeared. This underwater crisis had finally been completely ended. I collapsed by the shore, looking at the calm waters of Mirror Lake. I knew every threat Shadow Serpent had posed was finally gone for good. I thought that once the mutant host was destroyed, the world would finally have real peace. But the moment I returned to the control room, I found that global communications had suddenly been cut off. The screen was nothing but static. All contact with every safe zone had been cut off. I immediately activated the emergency communication system, only to find the signal blocked by powerful electromagnetic interference. The island was completely cut off from the outside world, becoming a true doomsday island. I pulled up the satellite surveillance feed and found that the source of the interference was coming from beneath the ruins of major cities around the world. The remaining traitors had activated Shadow Serpent's ultimate electromagnetic jamming device. They were trying to cut off all human contact and completely destroy any chance of rebuilding order. What shocked me even more was that on the surveillance feed, the remaining traitors had taken over the city's core district. They were holding tens of thousands of survivors who had just regained consciousness hostage as leverage. They demanded that I hand over the virus samples and all the evidence. I clenched my fists, burning with rage. These remnants were barely hanging on, yet they still dared to use innocent survivors' lives as bargaining chips. I immediately pulled together every resource on the island, regrouping the armed forces Black Crow left behind and all the Shadow Serpent weapons we had seized. I assembled an elite island squad. It was equipped with antidotes, spray canisters, heavy weapons, and bulletproof gear. The wind over Mirror Lake turned bitter again. A hard-fought battle to rescue the hostages and wipe out the remaining enemies was about to begin in the city's core district. I would never let innocent people become sacrifices. I led the island squad in 3 modified bulletproof assault boats. We sped toward the city's core district at full speed. The antidote sprayers on both sides of the boats kept spraying non-stop. The zombies wandering along the way quickly regained consciousness after coming into contact with the antidote. They curled up by the shore and stopped being a threat. The city's core district was completely surrounded by blast walls set up by the remaining traitors. Heavy machine guns and grenade launchers were mounted along the tops of the walls. Tens of thousands of survivors were being held in the central square, bound hand and foot and in grave danger. The remaining traitors shouted like mad over the loudspeakers. They gave me 10 minutes to hand over the samples and evidence, or they would set off the explosives. They would die together with the survivors. I didn't compromise for a second and immediately laid out the battle plan. Black Crow led a team around the side to blow open a gap in the blast wall. I led the main force in a frontal assault. Using laser turrets, we suppressed the enemy's firepower. The moment the assault boats hit shore, the battle began. Laser beams precisely destroyed the enemy firing positions on the wall. Grenade launchers blasted open the blast wall. The squad members rushed in one after another and engaged the remaining traitors in fierce combat. The enemy soldiers were no match for us and fell one after another. But when we got close to Civic Plaza, a towering figure rose from the ruins and blocked our way. It was the ultimate fusion soldier the remaining traitors had created with their last gene technology. It combined the strengths of every mutant and was their final trump card. The ultimate fusion soldier stood nearly 3 meters tall. Its body was covered in hard, armor-like scales. A pair of wings from a mutated zombie grew from its back. Its hands were the claws of a tyrant-class mutant. Its speed, strength, and defense were all at the maximum. Ordinary bullets did absolutely nothing to it. Roaring, it charged at the squad members. With one swipe of its claws, it sent 2 team members flying. Its heavy scales completely ignored the shockwaves from the grenade blasts. I immediately ordered the team to fall back and stepped forward alone to face it. The high-voltage shock blade in my hand struck its body and left only faint white marks. The fusion soldier's claws came straight at my face. I twisted aside and rolled out of the way. Taking the chance, I injected the gene-dissolving agent into its wound. The agent started breaking down their mutated genes. Its movements slowly grew sluggish, and its scales started falling off. I seized the chance, switched to armor-piercing rounds, and aimed at the core organ in its head. I pulled the trigger. The bullet pierced straight through. The fusion warrior let out a sharp, agonized howl. Its huge body crashed to the ground, completely lifeless. We rushed into the central plaza. We quickly rescued all the survivors being held hostage. We injected them with the antidote and cut them loose. The leader of the remaining traitors was hiding on the top floor, trying to detonate the planted explosives. I controlled a drone to drop explosives with perfect precision, reducing both him and the charges to ashes. The crisis in the city's core district was completely over. Tens of thousands of survivors bowed to us in thanks. As I looked at the crowd that had regained its freedom, I felt a sense of purpose like never before. After rescuing the survivors, I led the team to destroy the electromagnetic jamming device beneath the city. Global communications were instantly restored. The isolated island re-established contact with safe zones around the world. Major safe zones sent messages of congratulations, thanking me for bringing down Shadow Snake, wiping out the traitors, and rescuing the survivors. Humanity's reconstruction effort finally got back on track. I shared the original virus samples, all of Shadow Snake's experimental data, and the evidence on the traitor network with every global safe zone without holding anything back. Together, we established the Mo Antidote Research Center with Jinghu Isolated Island as its main base to mass-produce an antiviral antidote for everyone. The antidote was sent by airdrops and transport convoys to every fallen region in the world. Countless zombies regained their awareness. Cooking smoke rose once again from the ruined cities. People began appearing on the streets again. The shadow of the apocalypse was finally starting to fade, but I did not let down my guard. I knew humanity's threats had never been limited to biological mutations and power-hungry schemers. They also lay in the order and unity that had to be rebuilt afterward. I united the armed forces of the world's safe zones and established the Human Guardian Alliance. I named myself its guardian. I established a new order for the post-apocalyptic world. I protected every survivor's right to live. I made sure abuse of power and betrayal would never happen again. Jinghu Isolated Island was no longer an apocalyptic fortress. It had become the core of humanity's hope for rebirth. I stood on the terrace, watching the sunlight ripple across the lake. I knew a new era for humanity was about to begin. The global antidote deployment was nearing its end. More than 90% of the infected had returned to normal. City reconstruction was fully underway. Factories reopened, farmland was replanted, and schools resumed classes. The flame of human civilization was burning brightly once more. I transformed the island's defense system into a global early warning center. It monitored mutant remnants and potential threats around the clock worldwide. Black Crow became the Alliance's deputy commander. I led the armed forces in wiping out the remaining mutants and criminals around the world. Just as everything was getting better, the space station suddenly sent an emergency message. They said they had detected an unidentified meteor swarm from outer space heading for Earth. An unknown cosmic virus was attached to the surface of the meteors. If they hit Earth, it would trigger a disaster even more terrifying than the zombie virus. That news brought global reconstruction to a sudden halt. Humanity had just climbed out of the abyss of the apocalypse, only to face another deadly threat from space. I immediately called a video conference with the top leaders of the world's safe zones. We pulled together all of Earth's aerospace and defense resources to make a meteor interception plan. The underground lab on Jinghu Island was turned into a cosmic virus research center. I personally led the team, building on our experience developing a cure for the Earth virus, and started developing a vaccine against the cosmic virus. This interstellar defense battle, one that would decide humanity's survival, once again pushed me to the front lines of the world stage. All of the world's space forces were mobilized. Dozens of interceptor missiles launched toward the meteor swarm, but the cosmic virus coating the meteors could corrode metal. Half of the missiles failed and exploded mid-flight. The remaining missiles only managed to destroy some of the smaller meteors. The meteors were still falling toward Earth. They were expected to hit the surface in 72 hours. Samples of the cosmic virus were delivered to the island lab by space capsule. I worked on the research day and night without rest. I discovered that this virus could rapidly fuse with Earth's biological genes and create mindless cosmic mutants. They were far more destructive than zombies. Time was running out, and people around the world were panicking. The rebuilt cities fell into panic once again. I combined the original Earth virus sample with the cosmic virus sample for analysis. At last, I found the genetic traits they had in common. We developed the first-generation cosmic virus vaccine. But vaccine production was far too low to meet global demand. The countdown to impact kept ticking down. Every minute and second meant life or death. Then it hit me that after being upgraded, the island's lake water purification system could mass-produce the vaccine-based solution. I immediately activated all the island's equipment and pushed every solar diesel generator to full power. We produced the vaccine around the clock. At the same time, I called on factories around the world to switch to vaccine production. A worldwide vaccine push, a race against time, was launched on every front. Vaccine production kept speeding up. A total of 1 billion vaccine doses were produced worldwide and airdropped to every human settlement. All survivors were vaccinated and developed antibodies against the cosmic virus. Only 1 hour remained before impact. The last wave of interceptor missiles launched and struck the main bodies of the meteors with precision. The meteors shattered into countless pieces. They scattered across uninhabited areas around the world. The moment the meteors fell, the cosmic virus spread into the atmosphere. But all of humanity had already been vaccinated, and no one was infected. The scattered meteor fragments were quickly recovered and sealed off by Alliance forces. No cosmic mutants were created. Humanity successfully overcame this interstellar crisis. Thunderous cheers broke out all over the world. Humanity had finally defeated the double threat of the apocalypse and outer space. I stood on the terrace of the island, watching celebration scenes coming in from all over the world. My heart was full of mixed emotions. From a young man who quit his job to a protector in the apocalypse, from surviving alone on an island to protecting humanity, I had walked a road soaked in blood and smoke. With every step, I stayed true to my original purpose. I sealed away the cosmic virus samples and vaccine technology as humanity's ultimate last resort. At the same time, I announced that the Human Guardian Alliance would officially take over the global order and begin a new era of peaceful reconstruction. The apocalypse was finally over. Humanity entered a brand new era of rebuilding. The island at the center of Mirror Lake became humanity's spiritual symbol and central hub. The Guesthouse was turned into the headquarters of the Human Guardian Alliance. The fortress that once held off the apocalypse had now become a hall of peace. Cities around the world had been rebuilt, and transportation, communication, and energy systems were fully restored. People came out of the shelters and found hope in life again. Dating, work, and school, the ordinary parts of everyday life, had become the most precious kind of happiness. I permanently sealed the original virus samples beneath the island, and the chamber was protected with the highest level of security in the world, so a bioweapon crisis would never happen again. I fully deciphered my uncle's encrypted handbook. Back then, he hadn't betrayed anyone at all. He had protected humanity in his own way. At last, his life's work brought forth a light of hope in my hands. Sometimes I would sit on the terrace and look out at the shimmering waters of Mirror Lake. Eating a tomahawk steak and drinking an ice-cold craft beer, I still looked like the laid-back guy I was after quitting my job. The only difference was that now I also carried the duty and honor of protecting humanity. Black Crow led the Alliance forces in keeping the peace across the world. The survivors lived in peace and worked happily. There were no zombies, no looting, and no betrayal. There was only peace and hope. This was the ending I fought for and the future humanity deserved. Today is the 100th day since the apocalypse ended, and the 365th day since I arrived on the island in the middle of the lake. I stood on the third-floor terrace, looking at the thriving rebuilt cities on both sides of Mirror Lake. Traffic was bustling, and the lights were shining brightly. There were no more zombie roars and no more smoke or war. The island that was once a lonely outpost in the apocalypse had now become the safest, peaceful place in the world. My uncle's internet-famous Guesthouse reopened, no longer as a doomsday fortress, but as a peaceful stop for survivors from all over the world. I still kept my life simple. I worked at sunrise and rested at sunset while checking the Alliance's defenses. I developed defensive technology, and once in a while I enjoyed a tomahawk steak and an ice-cold craft beer. From a broke young man who quit his job to humanity's protector, I had never forgotten my original purpose. The safe zones around the world jointly awarded me the Medal of Humanity's Guardian, but I always felt that I had only done what I was supposed to do. To protect our home, to protect our own kind, to protect the spark of human civilization. A breeze swept across the lake, carrying the scent of flowers and the warmth of everyday life. I knew the apocalypse was gone for good, and humanity's future would be bright. I gripped the Alliance emblem in my hand, my eyes firm. From now on, I will keep protecting this land. I will protect this hard-won peace, so human civilization can live on forever by Mirror Lake, for generations to come.